Welcome back. To make sure you don't forget, first download the necessary files for this lesson from the video description. In this lesson, we're going to learn about Flexbox, which is another way to create layouts. And we're going to use Flexbox to create the header at the top of the page. Flexbox is particularly useful for working in one dimension, either rows or columns, making it ideal for smaller components and layouts. It's important to note that Flexbox and Grid are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they can be used together to create exceptional layouts. Now let's open the Lesson-8 folder in VS Code. Just like the previous lesson, let's go into our code and create a new file just to practice Flexbox. We're going to create a new file by clicking this icon and let's call it css-flexbox.html. As usual, we will create a complete structure and then open the page in the live server. And now we're ready to begin. We'll go into the body and start creating some flexboxes. Just like we did with Grid, we'll create a div with the class container. Inside, there will be two divs, box 1 and box 2. So we're going to use internal CSS again, just like we did for Grid, so that we keep our CSS code close to our HTML code. And for box 1, we're going to set the background color to light green. And then for the second div, box 2, we'll also set it to light blue. And now we have the two divs to work with. Just like with Grid, Flexbox requires a container, or this outer div. This container will serve as the Flexbox container, and the elements inside it will be placed into our Flexbox. To turn our container into a Flexbox, we'll follow two steps. First, we'll set the display property to Flex, which creates a Flexbox. Next, we'll set the Flex direction to row, aligning these elements horizontally. Now we can see the effect of Flexbox. Inside Flexbox, these divs, which are block elements by default, no longer behave like block elements. Instead, they act more like inline block elements, taking up only as much horizontal space as they need. If we add more text to the first div, it expands to occupy as much space as required. This demonstrates the flexibility of the Flexbox model, hence the name Flexbox. There's one more thing to note about Flexbox. If we make the second div taller, just like in our Grid example, the Flexbox will vertically align the elements. Let's modify our code to add a paragraph in this div to make it taller. You can see that it got taller, but we still maintain vertical alignment. Flexbox is another way to create these horizontal layouts while maintaining alignment. Let's go through some more examples. We'll go into our code and we're going to create another Flexbox to practice with. So we'll just copy this and paste it down here. We'll also add some spacing to the top of this to make it easier to separate. Let's add some margin top of 40 pixels. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to organize my CSS a little bit here. And I'll make a few changes. I'm going to add two more classes for the box colors, call 1 and call 2. I'll rename box 1 and box 2, and I'll update the CSS accordingly. So now, our first flexbox element is 150 pixels wide. For the second div, we're going to make it take up the remaining space. If you remember from grid, that's equivalent to 1 FR. We're going to learn how to achieve this in Flexbox. For the second div, box 4, we'll add a Flexbox-specific style called Flex. We'll set this to 1. We're also going to update the text in this div to display Flex1. Now, we can see that Flex1 makes this div take up the remaining space. So, Flex1 in Flexbox is the equivalent of 1 FR in grid. Let me explain to you briefly how it works. The Flex property is a shorthand for 3 individual properties. FlexGrow specifies how much the item will grow relative to other items in the container. FlexShrink specifies how much the item will shrink if there isn't enough space in the container. FlexBasis defines the initial size of the item before space is distributed. When you use Flex1, it is equivalent to FlexGrow1. The item will grow proportionally to fill the available space, sharing it equally with other items that also have FlexGrow1. FlexShrink1. The item will shrink if necessary to fit within the container. FlexBasis Auto. The item's initial size is determined by its content or any explicit width or height defined in CSS. If multiple items have Flex1, they will share the available space equally. If one item has Flex2 and another has Flex1, the first item will take up twice as much space as the second. This behavior ensures that the elements adjust dynamically based on the available space and their respective flex values. Now let's see another example. We're going to copy this and paste it again. For this example, we'll add another div to the bottom. I will replace call2 with call3 and add a new color, call3 light pink. Next, I'll update box 4 to box 5 and change the text to Flex2. Finally, I'll apply the Flex property with a value of 2 for box 5, Flex2. You can see that Flex2 is equivalent to 2 FR in grid. When 2 items both have Flex assigned, they take up the remaining space, but this value specifies how much of that space each item should take relative to the other. For example, the div box 5 with Flex2 will occupy twice the amount of remaining space compared to an element with Flex1. This demonstrates that the basic concepts we use with grid can also be applied in Flexbox. Flexbox could be considered more flexible because it allows elements to adapt dynamically based on available space and is simpler for one-dimensional layouts. However, grid shines when creating structured and visually precise layouts, making it less flexible but more powerful for certain use cases. Ultimately, the best choice depends on whether your layout needs are one-dimensional, Flexbox, or two-dimensional grid. We're going to go back to our practice file and go through some additional examples of Flexbox to help us build the header for our final project. If we look at the reference, we can see that there are 4, let's call them for now, buttons on the right side and a logo on the left side. For now, we will ignore the logo. We'll pretend we don't see it. First, let's create something that looks like the header. We're going to create a box with roughly the same shape. I will copy the last container and paste it right here below. I will change the container class to navbar. Right here, immediately after box 5, I will write the code for the navbar. I will copy the CSS code for the container class from above so that I don't have to rewrite it, and I will paste it here. and we're going to make this flexbox have the same shape as a header. So, let's set the height to 60 pixels and add a black border to visualize the box. Now, I will rename the classes Box 3, Box 4, and Box 5 to Box 6, Box 7, and Box 8, and set all of them to 150 pixels. I'm going to add a little bit of spacing to the bottom of the page here so that we can scroll this up. So to do that, we're going to scroll up and add some padding to the bottom of the body. We're going to add a style to the body and we're going to add some space to the bottom. So, padding bottom 500 pixels. And now we can scroll this flexbox up to the top so that it's easier to work with. So notice that these three divs are aligned to the left side. We can actually change how they are aligned horizontally. To do that, we're going to use a flexbox property called justify content. So this determines how these elements are laid out horizontally. For example, the default value is start. They will be aligned to the start or the left side. If we change this to end, now they will be aligned to the end or the right side. We can also change this to center to put all of our elements in the center. That's how we control how these elements are positioned horizontally. Now we're going to set a special value of space between. So what space between does is that it spreads out our elements evenly across this horizontal space, and it makes sure that there's equal amount of space between each element. This is particularly useful if we refer back to our reference to evenly distribute these 4 buttons. As you will see soon, when we build the header for our project, we will need a different HTML structure to position the logo on the left and the 4 buttons on the right. We can also use 2 other values like space around that distribute space around the items. Each item gets equal space on both sides, but the spaces at the edges are half the size of the spaces between the items. Space evenly. This one distributes space evenly between all items and the edges. The space between each item and the edges of the container is equal to the space between the items themselves. With space around, the items appear slightly more packed in the center because the edge spaces are smaller. On the other hand, space evenly ensures consistent spacing throughout. Now the last example we're going to go through for Flexbox is how to align elements vertically. We're going to set another Flexbox property called align items. So this determines how these elements are aligned vertically. The default value is stretch, which you can see here. The elements are stretching to fill up the vertical space. But we also have some options. We can align them to the start so they will no longer stretch to the vertical space. They will just take up as much vertical space as they need to, and they will be placed at the top. Or we can put them at the end, which will place them at the bottom of the container, and we can put them in the center, which will place them vertically centered. I will show you one more value for the flex direction property, and then we are ready to start building the main navigation system for our project. The flex direction column property changes the main axis of a flex container from horizontal row to vertical column. Here's what happens when you use it. Stacking items vertically. The child items, flex items, inside the container are arranged vertically, from top to bottom. Main axis becomes vertical. The main axis is now vertical, meaning justify content aligns items along the vertical direction. The cross axis becomes horizontal, so align items works horizontally. You can reverse the order using flex direction, column reverse, which stacks items from bottom to top. So now we have learned all the skills we need, and we're ready to build the header for our project. Let's go to the code for the project we were working on, index.html, and open the page in Live Server. We're first going to create an element at the top to represent our header. And for this, we will use a semantic tag from HTML5, the header tag. Let's take a quick look at the reference. I want to tell you that this large image and the text in the middle are also part of the header, so we'll create them together. This type of design is called above the fold. It's somewhat older but is still relevant in modern web design and digital marketing, though it has evolved with new technologies and screen sizes. Above the fold is a term often used in web design and marketing to describe the part of a web page that is visible immediately without requiring the user to scroll. It stems from the concept used in printed newspapers, where above the fold referred to the top half of the front page. We start adding the elements from top to bottom and from left to right. We continue with another special tag, the nav tag with the navbar class. The nav tag in HTML is a semantic element used to define a section of navigation links. It helps structure your web page and improves accessibility by indicating that this part of the page is for navigation. Next, I will add a div with the class logo for the logo. Inside this div, I will include a link with the clickable text, Nikki design, which will navigate the user to the index.html page. Why is it useful? Quick navigation. It allows the user to quickly return to the beginning of the site without having to look for the home button. The logo already occupies a visible spot on the site, so it also provides practical functionality. Now we are going to create the 4 buttons using an unordered list. The combination of unordered list and list items is frequently used to create navigation bars, navbars, in HTML. This approach is popular because it is semantic, easy to style, and accessible. UL provides a clean way to group navigation links in a list format. With the help of CSS, you can transform the basic list into horizontal, vertical, or drop-down style navigation. Screen readers can interpret the structure effectively, improving the website's usability for all users. And we will write unordered list followed by a dot, main nav, greater than sign, list item, asterisk, 4, greater than sign, and anchor tag. This emit abbreviation will create an unordered list with the class main nav, containing 4 list items elements with an anchor tag inside each. We know that we need 4 main pages, as we can see in the reference, and we also know the names of these pages, so we will add them. The first page is index.html with the text Home. Shop.html with the text Shop. News.html with the text News. Contact.html with the text Contact. Now we will create the structure for the hero image and the text above it. I'll also use an emit abbreviation, and I'll write it immediately after the closing nav tag. Div with the class hero greater than sign, div with the class hero content greater than sign, h1 plus p. For the title, I will add 6 words, lorem 6, and for the paragraph, I'll add 10 words, lorem 10. We have finished writing almost all the HTML code for the header, so now we can focus on styling it. So let's go into our CSS file right above the New Models section And let's add a comment so that we'll know in the future what we styled here. Header styles, and I'll press Ctrl+//. We're grouping related styles to enhance readability and make the code easier to read and understand. This is a good general practice to follow. Next, let's focus on our header styles. If you remember, we set a class of navbar, so we'll target that using .navbar, and first we'll set a width of 100%. I want the navigation menu bar to be fixed, visible, and accessible at all times, even when scrolling the page, so I will choose the value fixed for the position property. When you use position fixed, it's not mandatory to specify top, left, right, or bottom. However, it is recommended if you want precise control over where the element is placed on the screen. Without these properties, the fixed element stays in its current position, but will behave relative to the browser window. So I will position the navigation bar in the top left corner using top 0 and left 0. This code fixes the header element at the top of the page, which is useful for creating sticky navigation bars. Next, I will set the background color to number sign 4B4B4B. You'll notice that the links and the logo are aligned vertically because divs are, by default, displayed as block elements, and we haven't transformed this section into a flexbox yet. To create a horizontal layout, we'll turn our navbar container into a flexbox. We'll set the display to flex. Adjust Justify Content to space between. And use Align Items Set to Center to align everything horizontally. Then I will target the unordered list using the mainNav class. Display, flex. Align items, center. Next, we'll focus on the links. .navbar, anchor. Let's give these a color so it's easier to see them. Color, RGBA. 255. 255, 255, 0.50. Then add display block. The display block property is used to make each anchor element behave as a block level element, allowing it to take dimensions such as width, height, padding, and margins effectively, align horizontally or vertically, occupy the full width of its container for better clickability, and integrate seamlessly into a flexbox layout for easy alignment and distribution. Let's give these a padding, 10 pixels for top and bottom, 20 pixels for left and right. I will remove the default underline value using text decoration, none, and set the font size to 18 pixels. That looks pretty good. Next, we will use what is called mobile-first design and focus on creating the navigation menu for smaller screens. I will open the Web Developer Tools and resize the page to choose a breakpoint. I will go with a classic breakpoint of 768 pixels. Should be okay. Using at media, max width, 768 pixels. I will target the .navbar class with flex direction. Column. And apply a similar approach to the .mainNav class. If we look at the reference, we can see that we need to add two icons to represent the two menu states, closed and open. Let's go ahead and implement this right away. First, we go to the HTML code and add a button with the menu toggle class right above the unordered list. We use this button as a trigger for opening and closing the hamburger menu. Now, we return to the CSS code to add the two icons. I will search for HTML entities and visit toptal.com to look for trigram for heaven. I'll click to access the CSS code, copy it, and add it to the CSS file. I will target the button with the class .menuToggle and use the before pseudo class to add the icon code as the value for the content property. So, this is the icon for the closed menu. Next, I'll add the icon for the open menu. I'll go back to toptal.com, search for heavy multiplication X, and follow the same steps to copy the CSS code. This time, I'll target .menuToggle and attach an additional class, .open. Now, when I click the button, it already works, transitioning between the two states. This is achieved with the help of a JavaScript snippet, found in the Assets folder inside the scripts.js file. Since this tutorial isn't focused on JavaScript, we won't write JavaScript code, but I've added all the necessary explanations alongside the code to help you understand what's happening. The scripts.js file is already linked to the HTML document. If you check the bottom of the document, just above the closing body tag, you'll notice a simple line of code. This line is responsible for including the external JavaScript file into the HTML document, allowing the script to function properly on the page. Loading the JavaScript file, scripts.js, by placing it right before the closing body tag is a common practice because it ensures that the HTML content of the page is fully loaded before the JavaScript file executes. What I also want to mention is that these two icons can be added in various ways, both in CSS and HTML, and can even be built from scratch using only CSS. This time, I chose a more accessible method, as this tutorial is aimed at those with little to no experience in this field. Okay. Now, let's add a bit of styling to the two icons and reposition them. I will target .menuToggle as follows. Background, none, removes any default background styling, leaving the button transparent. Border, none, eliminates any default borders that browsers might add to buttons. Outline, none, disables the outline that appears when the button is focused, often used for custom focus styles. Color, white, sets the text or icon color inside the button to white. Font size, 24 pixels. Adjusts the size of the text or icon to 24 pixels. Margin right, 20 pixels. Adds 20 pixels of space to the right of the button for proper positioning. Cursor, pointer. Changes the cursor to a pointer when hovering over the button, indicating that it's clickable. Display, none, temporarily hides the button. The Display None property in this context hides the dot menu toggle button on larger screens where a hamburger menu isn't needed. Now, to make the icons visible, let's go back to the media queries and add some CSS rules for dot menu toggle. Display block. Position absolute. Positions the element relative to its closest positioned ancestor. This makes it easier to place the element precisely. Top 20 pixels. Positions the element 20 pixels from the top of its containing block. Right 10 pixels. Positions the element 10 pixels from the right of its containing block. As you can see, the two icons are only visible when the browser window is smaller. When the page is expanded to a larger size, they are no longer displayed. If we look again at the reference, we notice that in the hover state, the buttons have a different color. To achieve the same effect, I will add a new class in the HTML code, .current, for the link that points to the index.html page. We will add this class step by step to all the main pages. This way, when a user clicks on the button corresponding to a page, that button will display a different background color. This class is usually styled in the CSS file to visually highlight the current page, for example, by changing its color, background, or font weight. We will change the background color, so I will target .navbar, .mainNav, anchor, hover, and also the .current class. Background color, number sign, 575757. That looks pretty good. We're almost done with the navigation menu. We go to the navbar, anchor, and add a few declarations. Border radius, 5 pixels. A value of 5 pixels means the corners will have a subtle curve, giving the element a softer, less boxy appearance. Text align, center. To center the text. Transition, all, 0.4 seconds, ease. Adds a smooth transition effect when properties of the element change. Ease specifies a gradual acceleration and deceleration effect, making the transition feel natural. Now, let's also focus on the logo. I'll make the page larger. For .logo anchor, we will set a larger font size, 26 pixels. A white color, number sign, FFF. Some spacing on the left, margin left, 30 pixels. If we look at the reference, we can see that the spacing between the buttons is slightly larger, and there is more space to the right of the contact button. Let's make ours the same. I will go to the .mainNav class and add margin 0, 20 pixels. Padding 0. Max height 0. Transition, max height, 0.5 seconds, ease. Using max height is a more flexible approach because it allows the element to expand and collapse smoothly without requiring precise height values for the content. By setting max height to 0 for the closed state and max height 500 pixels for the open state, you create a smooth transition effect. This approach is common in drop-down menus and accordion components where content height may vary. Now I will also target the list item elements that contain the buttons. .mainNav list item. Margin 0, 10 pixels. I need to add some padding to the navbar because in the reference, it appears taller. Padding 10 pixels for top and bottom and 0 for left and right. I will also add z-index 1000 to ensure the navbar is always visible. The z-index property in CSS controls the stacking order of elements. Higher values are displayed in front of elements with lower values. Z-index 1000 assigns a very high stacking order to the element, ensuring it appears above most other elements on the page. Now we have a few more rules to add in the media queries. For the mainNav class, I'll add overflow, hidden, to hide the buttons. For mainNav.open, I will set a maximum height of 500 pixels when the menu is open. Max height, 500 pixels. Looking above, we see that the logo has a left margin of 30 pixels. This needs to be corrected to bring the logo back to the center on small screens. We'll go to the media queries, and for the logo, I'll set margin left, minus 30 pixels. We've finished the navigation menu. It looks pretty good. Now we need to work on the div with the class hero, which contains the image and the central text. Let's get this done quickly. Width, 100%, makes the element span the full width of its container. Min height, 100 viewport height, and height, 100 viewport height, ensures the element takes up the full viewport height with a minimum height of 100%. Background image, URL. This is a CSS property used to add images as the background of an element. This method is especially useful for adding decorative or full-width images without adding extra HTML elements, keeping the structure clean. The hero.png image is in the header folder, which is located inside the images folder. Background size. Cover scales the background image to cover the entire element, maintaining its aspect ratio. The background size property has several other values that define how a background image is scaled. For us, the value cover does exactly what we need. Background repeat. No repeat prevents the background image from repeating. Background position. Center, center. Centers the background image horizontally and vertically. Display, flex. Align items, center. Justify content, center. To center its content both vertically and horizontally. Margin top, 65 pixels. Add space above the element to push it down. Opacity, 0.6, makes the element slightly transparent. Now let's work on the H1 title and the paragraph. Hero content. Color, number sign, FFF, sets the text color to white. Text align, center, centers the text horizontally. Background color, RGBA, 0, 0, 0, 0.7, adds a semi-transparent black background. Padding, 40 pixels, 30 pixels, adds some inner spacing in all directions. Border radius, 10 pixels, rounds the corners of the element. Now for the title, .hero content, H1. Margin bottom, 25 pixels. Adds 25 pixels of space below the H1 element. Now for the paragraph. .hero content, P. Font size, 20 pixels, sets the font size of paragraphs tags inside hero content to 20 pixels. Now for smaller screens, I want to slightly reduce the size of the title and paragraph. To do this, I'll go to the media queries and add a new rule for hero content. Width, 95%. Padding, 20 pixels. This CSS rule sets the hero content element to take up 95% of the container's width and adds 20 pixels of inner spacing around the content. This ensures the content is neatly contained and spaced within the hero section. Now if I open and close the navigation menu, I notice that it drops down over the image, and that's not okay. This happens because the navbar is set to position fixed, which is fine for larger screens. For devices with smaller screens, I no longer want the navbar to be fixed, so I will change it to position relative. Oops. No problem. We'll fix it right away. I'll target the hero class with margin top, 0 pixels, to stick the image to the bottom edge of the navbar, and that's it. Let's check if everything is okay. It's not looking right to me. It seems that the buttons are too close to each other. We need to go back to the media queries and add a margin for the list item elements. .main nav, list item, margin, 5 pixels for the top and bottom, and 0 for the left and right. Let's check one more time now. Mission accomplished. That was tough, but it's done now. One final task for this lesson. In the reference, we can see that when scrolling down the page, a button labeled Top appears in the bottom right corner. Clicking on this button automatically scrolls the page back to the top. Let's get this done quickly as well. For this button, we also need a JavaScript snippet, which is already placed in the scripts.js file. First, we add the button in the HTML code, just above the line that loads the JavaScript file. Button onClick equals top function specifies an event listener. When the button is clicked, the JavaScript function top function will be executed. This function is likely designed to scroll the page back to the top. ID equals top_btn assigns a unique identifier, ID, to the button. This can be used to style the button or target it in JavaScript. Class equals top button. Now, let's style the button. Right below the media queries, I'll target the top button class. All the code I will add is already familiar to you, so there's nothing to explain. Position, fixed. Bottom, 20 pixels. Right, 5 pixels. Background color, RGBA, 0, 0, 0, 0.5. Color, white. Border, none. Border radius, 50%. Width, 40 pixels. Height, 40 pixels. Text align, center. Font size, 16 pixels. Cursor, pointer. Display, none. Zindex, 1000. Initially, the button is hidden, but when the user scrolls down more than 20 pixels, the scroll to top button becomes visible. I will set the opacity to 1 when the button is hovered over. Top button, hover, background color, RGB, A0001. To make the button visible, I will target the show class, which is added to the button by the JavaScript code. Top button, show, display, block. And with that, we've wrapped up Lesson 8. I hope you enjoyed it, and most importantly, I hope you understood everything we've covered here. I look forward to see you in Lesson 9, where we will build the new articles section together. Don't forget to practice and challenge yourself to learn something new every day. Remember, every little step brings you closer to mastering your craft. Keep that creative energy alive, and happy coding!